Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we present Episode 1 of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen.
In any good old English province, the arrival of a stranger causes a great stir among the people, particularly if the stranger is a wealthy young man who happens to be single. Happy indeed were all the mothers and daughters in the hope that one of their girls could marry the new tenant of Netherfield, Mr. Bingley.
Now, girls, when you meet Mr. Bingley, you must all smile very pleasantly. He has 5,000 a year, you know. 5,000 a year.
Of course, a single man in possession of a large fortune must be in want of a wife.
Very true indeed, Mr. Bennet. Smile, girls. Dear Jane, you're so beautiful. Mr. Bingley will surely like you.
Thank you, Mamma.
And what about Lizzie? Yes, Jane is lovely, but Lizzie...
Oh, no, Papa. I haven't the sweetness of temper that Jane has. I shouldn't like Mr. Bingley, even if he did like me. Mr. Bingley like
Quiet,
us?
please, quiet. How am I to read with all this noise?
But the ball in Meryton is tonight. The girls must prepare.
I see. If anyone needs me, I'll be in the library enjoying what peace and quiet I can find.
You're not going to the ball?
Why should I? I couldn't possibly hope to dance with the great Mr. Bingley.
Oh, Mr. Bennet, how you take delight in vexing me. Oh, there's Mr. Bingley now.
The tall one.
I don't know, but he is very handsome, is he not?
Indeed.
Hush, here they come.
Mr. Bingley, Mr. Darcy, may I present to you Mrs. Bennet and two of her daughters, Miss Jane Bennet and Miss Elizabeth.
How do you do, sir?
It's a great pleasure to meet you at last, Mr. Bingley.
The pleasure's all mine, I assure you, Mrs. Bennet.
As Sir William mentioned, these are only two of my daughters. My other three are around here somewhere. Ah, Mary is sitting there. And Kitty and Lydia are dancing in the group over there.
Charming. Never have I met such charming people.
And how do you do, Mr. Darcy? It's so wonderful to have one of Mr. Bingley's friends with us.
How do you do?
Miss Jane Bennet, may I claim your hand for the next dance?
Yes, of course.
Oh, wonderful, she'd love to. Go, Jane, go dance with Mr. Bingley. Do you dance, Mr. Darcy?
Not if I can help it. Goodbye, Mrs. Bennet, Miss Bennet.
Well, how do you like that, Lizzie?
Oh, not at all, Mamma. My feelings are quite hurt.
Darcy, why are you standing about in this stupid manner? You should be dancing, enjoying yourself.
How can I when you've been dancing with the only pretty woman in the room?
Jane Bennet is the most beautiful creature I've ever known. But look, over there are two of her youngest sisters, Mary and Elizabeth. Elizabeth is very pretty. Quite charming and agreeable, I'm sure.
She's tolerable, I suppose, but not handsome enough to tempt me. I'm in no mood to give consequence to ladies who are slighted by the other men.
Hush, she's coming towards us.
She's passed. I'm off to dance with Jane. I hope Elizabeth didn't hear you.
She's tolerable, I suppose. But not handsome enough to tempt me. And then he said, I won't give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men.
Quite a favourite with Mr. Bingley and his two sisters, Jane was invited to dine with them at Netherfield. Due to a sudden fever, her stay of one evening was prolonged much longer than expected.
Oh, Jane has fallen ill. Now she will have to stay at Mr. Bingley's for a fortnight at least. Isn't that wonderful?
Mamma.
I say you're the only woman I know who can rejoice that her dearest child is in agony on her deathbed.
Nonsense! People don't die of trifling little colds. Jane will be just fine. But only after she spends more time with Mr. Bingley.
Mamma, it seems Jane is really very ill, and I'd like to go and comfort her if I may. I can't stay here and let Jane be a burden on Mr. Bingley's sisters. Please, let me take care of my sister.
No, you shall not, Lizzie. I won't have you ruining your sister's chances for a happy marriage.
I'm inclined to agree with Lizzie. Besides, what will Mr. Bingley think of us if we do not show some concern for poor Jane?
Oh, very well, you may go, if you must. But I see no reason in it. After all, it's only a little cold. Surely Jane will be just fine.
'Twas a day with nice weather, a good day for Elizabeth to enjoy a walk to Netherfield, a good day for Mr. Darcy to be outdoors, and a good day for them both to meet.
Miss Elizabeth.
Mr. Darcy, I've come to see about my sister's health, and to be of service if I may.
Have you? And you walked all the way?
Yes. Mr. Darcy, may I see my sister?
Of course, Miss Bennet. Your sister, Miss Bennet.
Lizzie? Oh, Lizzie, I'm so glad you've come.
How are you, Jane?
I'll be all right now. Mr. Bingley's sisters, Mrs. Hurst and Caroline, have been very polite and attentive to me. Why, Lizzie, you look as though you've been exercising.
I have. I walked all the way here.
All the way?
It's only 3 miles, and the weather was very nice. I must have looked awful when I met Miss Bingley in the hall. Oh, she seemed to approve of me just as much as Mr. Darcy.
Don't judge her so harshly, Lizzie. She's been all kindness to me. I'm sure if you get to know her...
Oh, Jane, don't worry yourself. I'm sure it's only my appearance after walking so far. Can you believe that she walked all over the countryside because her sister has a cold? I was so shocked when I saw her. Her hair was so blousy, and her petticoat was 6 inches deep in mud.
I thought she showed great love for her sister in coming all this way.
Mr. Darcy noticed her petticoat, I'm sure. Would you want your sister Georgiana making such a display, traipsing all over the continent?
Certainly not.
Jane is a very sweet girl, no doubt, but her family. She told me she has an uncle in London who lives in Cheapside. Oh, can you imagine?
It wouldn't matter to me if she had uncles enough to fill all of Cheapside.
Still, her low family connections will greatly affect her society and the chances of her marrying well. That is the material point, Bingley.
Jane recovered. A ball was promised at Netherfield, and a regiment full of handsome soldiers came into town to stir up the hearts of all the young ladies. Miss Bingley said of these changes,
I'm glad she's gone. Not Jane, of course, her sister, Elizabeth. She's so independent and strong-willed. Not at all what a young lady should be. What do you say, Mr. Darcy?
I agree. I'm glad she's gone.
The regiment which moved into Meryton brought with it a charming and handsome young man who got on very well with Miss Elizabeth. It was Mr. Wickham, an old acquaintance of Mr. Darcy's.
You know Mr. Darcy?
We grew up together. My father was old Mr. Darcy's steward. What's your opinion of the current Mr. Darcy?
Everyone here dislikes him very much. It's no wonder, since he's so proud and arrogant. Though he is rich, 10,000 a year, they say, he has absolutely no right to be so rude and disagreeable.
Ah, I can see you're a great judge of character. Darcy's always been bent that way. If it were not for what he'd done to me, I'd say not to judge him too hard.
What has he done to you?
When my father died, old Mr. Darcy took me in and raised me as his own son. Gave me the finest education so that I would become the minister for their congregation. Ah, he was truly the finest man that ever lived. But when old Mr. Darcy died, his son flat out refused me the position and sent me away out of such hatred and jealousy that I've never seen before. And now I'm forced to make my way in the world as a soldier.
I always knew he was disagreeable. But for Mr. Darcy to completely disregard his late father's wishes, I almost can't believe it. How much you've had to suffer at his hands.
But I have forgiven him. I bear him no ill will.
You are very good. If I were in your situation, I could never forgive him.
Who's that over there?
Oh, that's Lydia, my youngest sister. She's 15.
Ah, I see. Miss Bennet, you have no idea what a comfort it is to me to have told you about my misfortunes. I'm so glad I have found a friend in you.
My dear, tell the cook to expect a guest tonight for dinner.
Oh, it's Mr. Bingley, isn't it? Jane, I knew your illness would pay off.
It is not Mr. Bingley. In fact, it's someone I've never seen in the entire course of my life. I've had a letter from our cousin, Mr. Collins. When I am dead, the entire estate of Longbourn will go to him.
And I suppose he's coming to look everything over, isn't he?
His letter says quite the contrary. He's coming to make amends with our family, and he hopes he may marry one of our daughters to keep the house and the family.
Is he a sensible man, Papa?
I think not, or rather I hope not. I hope he will be very amusing.
Well, I think it's very honourable of him to visit us with such a purpose. We will welcome him and treat him with the utmost politeness, won't we, girls?
Ah, Mr. Collins.
How good of you to come, Mr. Collins.
How do you do, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet? Please accept my gratitude for so graciously welcoming me into your charming home. Of course, Rosings Park, the estate of my esteemed patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, is far more grand. But this is a very charming house indeed, Mrs. Bennet. Ah, and these must be my delightful cousins.
There's Jane, our eldest, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia, our youngest.
My dear, dear cousins, allow me to express how truly sorry I am that your father's estate was entailed to me. I assure you that I would not wish to take this place from you for the world. And I hope to make proper amends best I can.
Did you have a good journey, sir?
Oh, indeed. Thank you so very much for asking. I had the privilege of riding over in the carriage of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, or should I say, one of them, for her ladyship has several. Mr. Collins first set his eyes on Jane, the loveliest of the Bennet sisters. However, when told of the family's hopes for Jane to marry Mr. Bingley, Mr. Collins felt that Elizabeth would be a good second choice. She was, after all, the second loveliest. Cousin Elizabeth, Mr. Bingley has bestowed upon me great honour in extending to me an invitation to the ball at Netherfield. I hope to dance with all my fair cousins, but I would like to reserve the privilege of dancing the first 2 dances with you.
Why, Mr. Collins, Lizzie would love to. Wouldn't you, Lizzie?
Mamma,
Hush, child. You should be flattered that Mr. Collins picked you first. Now go get ready, Lizzie.
Yes, Mamma.
And tonight at the ball, don't keep that handsome Mr. Wickham to yourself. Your sisters Lydia and Kitty would like to dance with him as well.
Yes, Mamma.
And my patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
Wrong way, Mr. Collins.
Oh, excuse me, I do beg your pardon.
Mr. Collins, will you please try not to kick me?
Of course, Cousin Elizabeth. Fair, fair cousin.
Other way, Mr. Collins. Charlotte, my dear friend, how are you?
The question is, Lizzie, how are you? I saw you dancing with your cousin.
Oh, it was awful.
Still better than dancing with Mr. Darcy.
Indeed. I've heard he rarely dances. Even if he were to ask me, I'm determined not to stand up with him.
Lower your voice, Lizzie.
Miss Bennet, are you engaged for the next dance?
Mr. Darcy? No, I'm not engaged, sir.
Then may I claim your hand for the next set?
I had not... That is, I could not... Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Oh, why couldn't I think of an excuse? Now I must dance with him. Help me, Charlotte.
He pays you a great favor in singling you out, Lizzie. Go dance with him.
Why do you stare, Mr. Darcy? Will you not speak? Perhaps you could remark about the room or the number of couples.
Do you always talk when you're dancing?
Yes, sometimes it's best. It helps to dispel any awkwardness between partners. I recently had the pleasure of meeting an old acquaintance of yours, Mr. Darcy.
Did you?
From my stay at Netherfield, I remember hearing you speak of your temper, your only failing. You said your good opinion once lost is lost forever. This acquaintance has been quite unfortunate, as he seems to have fallen out of favor with you.
I can't imagine who you mean.
Then you don't remember the son of your father's steward, George Wickham?
Wickham. I believe we've said enough, Miss Bennet.
Yes, quite. Now we may dance, and enjoy saying as little as possible to each other.
I shall return you to your friend, Miss Bennet.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Darcy. Ah, Mr. Darcy. I think I can guess what you're thinking at this very moment.
Can you?
You're thinking about how tedious it would be to spend your entire life in the company of such low people.
Actually, my mind was more agreeably engaged. I was meditating on the great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman can bestow.
Indeed. And what lady is to have the credit of inspiring such reflections, Mr. Darcy?
Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
The ball at Netherfield, though not so pleasant for Elizabeth, was quite pleasant for Jane, as she spent the majority of her time with Mr. Bingley. There were, however, a few stains on the enjoyment of the evening that were felt by both Jane and Lizzie. Their mother's impropriety and gossip, the shameless flirtation of their two youngest sisters, Kitty and Lydia, and poor plain Mary, volunteering to sing when she had not been asked. This was most distressing to Jane and Lizzie. Mary could not sing well, and the impropriety was not to be borne. Mr. Bennet, who attended this ball, had to put a stop to it, right in the middle of her song.
Thank you, Mary. You've delighted us very much, long enough. Let the other young ladies have a chance to exhibit.
But though the evening had some moments of annoyance and embarrassment, on the whole it was quite enjoyable. Mr. Collins, reaching the end of his stay at Longbourn, was not wanting to leave empty-handed, decided to secure Lizzie as his wife for himself. With the help of Mrs. Bennet, he arranged to meet with Elizabeth alone. "Miss Elizabeth, will you sit by the window, please?"
Mr. Collins, I believe I hear one of my sisters calling for me.
No. Be seated. This is most important.
I really can't imagine what you would have to say to me.
Cousin Elizabeth, permit me to tell you that I have your mother's permission for this address. My reasons for marrying are, first, I think that it is right for every clergyman in easy circumstances like myself to set the example in matrimony in his parish. Secondly, I am convinced that it will add greatly to my happiness. And thirdly, which perhaps I ought to have mentioned first, is the particular advance and recommendation of the noble lady whom I have the honour of calling patroness. She said, "Mr. Collins, a clergyman like you must marry. Choose properly a gentlewoman for my sake, and for your own, let her be active, a useful sort of person, and able to make a small income go a good way. Your wit and vivacity, I think, must be acceptable to her, especially when tempered with the silent respect which her high rank will inevitably excite."
Mr. Collins, really...
Thus is my general intention in favour of matrimony. The fact is, as I am to inherit this estate after the death of your honoured father, I could not satisfy myself without choosing a wife from among his daughters, that the loss to them might be as little as possible when the terrible event takes place, which, however, I hope may not be for several years. This has been my motive, my fair cousin, and I flatter myself it will not sink me in your esteem. And now, nothing remains for me but to assure you in the most animated language of the violence of my affection. To fortune I am perfectly indifferent, and shall make no demand of that nature on your father, and that £1,000 is all you may ever be entitled to. On that point, therefore, I shall be uniformly silent, and you may assure yourself that no ungenerous reproach shall ever pass my lips when we are married.
You are too hasty, sir. You forget that I have made no answer. Please accept my thanks for the compliment you are paying me. I am well aware of the honour of your proposal, but it's impossible for me to do anything but refuse.
I've heard that it's common for young ladies to reject the man they secretly mean to accept when he first proposes. and that sometimes the refusal is repeated a second or even a third time. I am by no means discouraged by what you have just said, and shall hope to lead you to the altar ere long.
I am perfectly serious in my refusal. You could not make me happy, and I am convinced that I am the last woman in the world who can make you so. Were your friend Lady Catherine to know me, I am sure she would find me in every way ill-qualified for the situation.
I cannot imagine that her ladyship would disapprove of you, and you may be certain, when I have the honour of seeing her again, I shall speak in the very highest terms of your modesty, economy.
Indeed, Mr. Collins, all praise of me will be useless. You must let me judge for myself and believe what I say. I wish you very happy and rich, and by refusing you do all in my power to prevent your being otherwise. In proposing, you have satisfied your feelings with regard to my family, and may take possession of Longbourn estate whenever it falls, without any regrets. The matter is settled.
I flatter myself, dear cousin, that you are not serious in refusing me. My hand is not unworthy of acceptance, and the position I offer is highly desirable. My situation in life, my connections with the family of de Bourgh, and my relationship to you are highly in my favour. You must realize that another offer of marriage may never be made to you. Your finances are so small that it will undo the effects of your loveliness and good character. I must conclude that you are not serious in your rejection of me. I choose to attribute it to a wish of increasing my love.
I thank you again for the honour you have done me in your proposal, but to accept is absolutely impossible. My feelings in every respect forbid it.
You are uniformly charming.
Mr. Collins, I will not marry you.
Mr. Bennet! Mr. Bennet! Elizabeth says she is determined to not have Mr. Collins. And now he says he will not have her. You must talk to Lizzie and make her marry him.
I'm sorry, my dear, I have not the pleasure of understanding you.
Oh, Mr. Collins has asked Elizabeth to marry him, and she has refused him. I cannot make her accept him, and now he says he will not have her.
Oh, is that all? And what do you want me to do about it?
You must talk some sense into Lizzie and force her to marry Mr. Collins. Lizzie, come here. Your father wishes to speak with you.
Yes, Papa?
Come here, child. As I understand it, Mr. Collins has proposed to you.
Yes.
And you have refused him?
I have.
Yes, she has, and if she does not change her mind, I will never speak to her again.
Well, Elizabeth, an unhappy choice is before you. Your mother will never speak to you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins.
Indeed, I shall not.
And I will never speak to you again if you do.
Oh, Papa!
You made the right decision, my dear.
Oh, Mr. Bennet, what is to become of us all?
We bring the first half of Pride and Prejudice to a close. Tune in next Sunday to hear the thrilling conclusion of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. This has been Vintage Radio Today, in association with the Building Block School for the Arts in Columbia, Tennessee. Tonight's cast was Tracy Allred as Mr. Darcy, Sherelle Knox as Elizabeth Bennet, Samantha Knox as Jane Bennet, Michael Knox as Mr. Collins and the narrator, Joseph Green as Mr. Bingley, Sir William Lucas, and Mr. Wickham, Sue Mann as Mrs. Bennet and Charlotte Lucas, and Tim Wood as Mr. Bennet. All the audio was recorded by the cast and edited by Sherelle Knox. We wish you all very well, and thank you very much for listening to Vintage Radio Today.